I'm joined now by charting man Dan McDermott from thechartguys.com. Dan, welcome back.
Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Dan, the market was starting to look like last time we chatted, the technicals were suggesting that the bottom was in. Then we saw a bit of a sell-off earlier in the week. What was the cause of that, and is that consistent with your sort of thesis going forward that the sort of bottom is materializing a bit?
So it still just bears having confidence, where we know that this bounce was going to give us a weekly lower high. We changed the daily trend. That's a great start. It's just giving us a weekly lower high. The longer term signals from prolonged downtrends that I have had success with in the past are weekly trend changes. And that's going back to CGC in 2017 in the $7 range, and also going back to Bitcoin in the $4,000 range when it first changed its weekly trend after a prolonged downtrend. So that is what this sector needs to head into the start of the year 2020. And part of what is required to change the weekly trend is coming off of a bottom, changing the daily trend, getting a nice bounce, but then losing that daily uptrend to set the weekly higher low. And that might be a little bit difficult to understand, but I'll point out in the charts in a bit exactly what I mean. But essentially it is the last part of despair where we lose the daily uptrend. The bulls say, oh, great, here we go again. We're about to fade back down. We see that last bit of despair. We hold the recent low, set the weekly higher low, and then shift that momentum. So that is the only hope for the bulls to shift this sector sentiment to start 2020.
Sure. I'm assuming you keep one eye on the sort of the fundamental drivers out there that are probably come to affect your technical indicators. Do you see anything happening in the early part of 2020 that would constitute a fundamental, signal that the technicals might be about to change?
I think it would have to be something that surprises us, because at this point we have legalization 2.0 in Canada. That's a known event. We have the US having less and less hope of the SAFE Act going anywhere in the near term. So there is nothing that is looming, and that's usually the way that it goes, where, if it were a known event, it would be already priced in. So pending any surprise, it is going to be, in my opinion, just a straight up signal that won't have a fundamental reason for it. That being said, I would welcome a surprise bullish fundamental development that would jumpstart the bulls and make that pattern play out.
Right. Okay. Now, also, I think one of the things that sort of threw the market back into a bit of a sell-off was this short report came out on TrueLeave, which has to date been sort of the leading market darling in the last phase of this big correction. And that suddenly catalyzed a sell-off in TrueLeave shares. But looking at the information, it's nothing new, and yet nonetheless it catalyzed a big sell-off. What was your sort of take on that?
Yeah, very similar. If you were invested in TRUL and you did not know this information, that's a red flag to tell you you need to do a better job of due diligence, because this is all known information. Personally, I do not have a long-term TRUL position because that has been the overhanging cloud that I have been cautious of. I know that there's this FBI investigation. I know that that has not been resolved yet, and I know that it could potentially trickle down, having impact on TRUL. So that has been a known event. And clearly it was used to strike fear into this market. And the herd, which is, retail traders, are very easily manipulated with their emotions. And these short sellers certainly take advantage of that.
I see. So in your view, is that something that should be ignored when somebody comes out with information that's just rearranged in a way to cast the company in a negative light and trigger a short? Or is that something that investors need to nonetheless pay attention to?
Need to pay attention to it for sure, because obviously it has a significant impact. And it's the kind of thing where I read that information and then we all looked at the chart guys to buy the dip that day. And I looked to buy that dip because it was known information. If it were unknown information being brought to light that the market had not been able to adequately price in at that point, I would have been much more patient trying to play a bounce play. But it's the kind of thing where we say, okay, the market for the most part has priced this in. We now have this short-term influx of bearish pressure because of this report, but that often leads to a dip buying opportunity, which in the case of TRUL, I think that day from low of the day to the high of the bounce was an 18% bounce. So certainly opportunity, knowing that it was no new information.
Yeah, you bet. All right, Dan, let's go take a look at the charts now and see what they're telling us.
So the first thing we're going to look at here on CGC is the daily time frame where we have a higher low uptrend. And I'm going to mark the higher lows that are most important to me on the way up. And right now we're trying to form another higher low. We have a tight inside bar range currently forming today. Depending on how the day ends, if this inside bar on Monday were to break bullish, then I would say this is our new daily higher low of 1945. We don't have enough follow through off of that point yet to call that our new daily higher low. But let's just say that 1945 does end up being our new daily higher low, and the bulls start next week with a little bit of green, not enough to break the top of the bounce, 22.25, and then they roll over and lose the daily uptrend. At that point, you're going to see bulls all over social media lamenting and complaining and talking about how bearish the sector is, and it's the kind of scenario where we have to lose that daily uptrend. This is now the weekly chart, to look for a weekly higher low to form. So I am watching this pattern where we bounced on the weekly time frame and topped out at 22.48. We then dumped to our low. We rejected with a lower high compared to 22.48 at 22.25. And now if we lose the daily uptrend to either end 2019 or start 2020, we then have to hold the low of the dump, which I think the bulls will be able to do because that's down at 13.81. And we are currently still 25+% above that level. Even if we lose the daily uptrend, we pull back to $18, we will still be a significant amount of percentage points above that low. Then we have to change the daily trend back to the bulls, form that weekly higher low, break those two resistances, and change the weekly trend for the first time since this weakness started back in April. That is the must-happen scenario for me to be bullish to start 2020. So you're going to see a lot of people giving up if we do lose that daily uptrend and start to consolidate for that weekly higher low. A lot of bulls are going to give up, but we will be continuing to watch for this weekly higher low to try and form. So we're doing a lot of looking ahead. First things first, we have to lose the daily uptrend, which has not happened yet. But for CGC and APHA, they both have the same setup on the weekly time frame, and that's because they are two of the stronger names comparative to ACB and Cron, which have been a bit weaker in comparison. So looking at TRUL, we have the reaction to the dump, the significant size of the bounce, and now we're fading back down again. So at this point, trading is at the mercy of the range established on that dump and bounce. And yes, absolutely, this is a news event or a short report, if you want to call that a news event. Either way, it's a news event that significantly is impacting the charts. That being said, first things first, short term, we're going to be looking at this tightening 4-hour range. We have the low of the dump, the high of the bounce, and I'm looking for a 4-hour higher low compared to 1206, and for this 4-hour range to tighten to start next week. But viewers of your show will remember that we were on here talking about TRUL's monthly time frame sometime in the last month or so, and we were looking for a lower high to be set compared to 2165. So while yes, this short report is absolutely impacting the charts, it's giving us the lower high that we were anticipating. It's just happening a lot faster than I would have anticipated. So all-time high, all-time low, lower high, higher low, lower high, and we're going to be looking for a monthly higher low to form compared to 991. We are currently $4.50 below our resistance and about $3.59 above our support. So fairly close to the middle of the range, and we'll be watching for this monthly pattern to tighten up to start 2020, and we'll be looking for a break sometime mid-2020. So these are all things that we're watching from mid to longer term setups. And again, the sector must change weekly trends for me to say that we have a clear sentiment shift in the sector. And what keeps me hopeful, or at least watching the bulls and giving them a chance, is again the amount of space that we have to work with to form the weekly higher lows before we drop down to the lows of the dump. Right now, CGC has 30% to work with. So I don't usually do much predicting, but I would say best case scenario as far as the most clear setup happening that I want to see the bulls start next week with some green. I want to see the inability to break 22.25 resistance. If we break that resistance level, obviously that's nice for the sector, but the weekly trend change will still be needed. But looking for the lower high, if we then roll over, set a daily lower high and lower low by breaking 1945 support, Then we zoom out to the weekly time frame. We patiently wait for the daily trend to change back to the bulls. We look for a weekly high or low to be formed somewhere in the $17 to $18 range. And then we look for the bulls early 2020 to try and break 22.25 and 22.48 resistance for the clear trend change and clear shift in momentum for the sector bulls to regain a bit of control. We'll see how it plays out. We'll be tuning in day by day. And this is the kind of thing where I don't make any bets based on this happening. I don't lock myself into positions. I don't understand why people do that with trading, where they make a claim for something months down the road. Every single day of trading, we get more and more information that can allow us to make a more and more informed guess or bet on the likely scenario to play out. So locking yourself into something happening 2 months down the road and then ignoring the day-by-day information that we get is really limiting yourself from having all the information available.
Thanks very much for joining us again, Dan. Visit Dan McDermott at thechartguys.com.
Thanks a lot. See you next time, James.